Perfect. So, good afternoon and welcome to our session. I'll be presenting today with my friend Michael O'Reilly, founder of Personalized Genomic Health, on an idea being brought to fruition and exploring patients as proprietors with their own genomic capital. So my name is Christine von Rysfeld. I'm co-founder, CEO of a nonprofit called People with Empathy. The main reason we started this nonprofit was to break down the obvious silos that my co-founder and I had seen in attending numerous conferences in the healthcare industry. But the secondary reason we started, and one not known to many of you, was due to my own personal situation. As a 45-year-old single woman living on Social Security disability, dependent on Medicare, with very little support, both emotionally and financially, my options were limited. As a productive member of society on occasion, who brings profits to our industry through insights and experience, I basically have no value. When Social Security was first established, it was never intended to be used as income, and most people on Social Security can barely afford to survive, especially if you're trying to do this alone. Most of the work that I do is unpaid and done in an effort to make myself feel a little less like a burden and to eventually, potentially, be self-sufficient. As an original participant with Stanford's Human-Wide Precision Medicine pilot program, I was exposed to the world of precision and personalized medicine, realizing the significant value of the data I possess. Being of mixed race with multiple rare and genetic conditions and armed with a series of missteps in my own care, I wanted to explore the potential that I, as a patient, could potentially take part in the wealth that I was distributing to everyone else. With the pandemic happening, our healthcare industry is changing and quickly. We are looking at things with different perspectives and finding collaborations that actually work, providing monetary benefits to so many. But as a patient, I still have little to no say in what happens to my own information. So I thought I'd take a risk, put it out there, and see what could come out of my experience so that others could benefit. And maybe, just maybe, we can change the perspective in an industry which has been focused on profiting off of our pain. So how do we do this and at the same time give purpose to thousands of individuals living with their own conditions? With that, I'm going to bring in Michael to help explain the logistics. And Michael, are you ready?
Sure.
So can you start out by just giving us a brief history on consumer genetic testing, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So consumer genetic testing started about 15 years ago. And initially the product was the genetic test, but over time it really evolved into what I refer to half jokingly as a dark economy, where the individual, as opposed to the test, became the product. And what that meant is that it became the most fundable business model to sell the genetic test at a loss and then make the money on selling the data, the individual's data, to third parties. So that was how the industry really sort of started to take off. And just to sort of bring it up to date, it experienced a major drop off in demand when we came up against the Facebook effect, the equivalent where consumers actually, like Christine started to become aware of the fact that their data was being used, mostly in the point and click, or the click-through world, advertising world. But so genetic tests were dramatically affected by that. And then the genetic test economy fell off the cliff again with C19. And that's basically where we are today.
I have them cleaning the yard outside. So Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the consumer whole genome sequencing and what's at stake here?
So everybody on this call probably remembers the earliest days of the internet, where this thing called the web came along and changed our relationship with data. So whole genome sequencing, as opposed to limited genetic testing, whole genome sequencing is going to be as big an effect, and it's going to change our relationship with our personal biology. So consistent with, we were at a moment in time 25 years ago, and I say this sort of very calmly and sincerely, I think we're there again. If you think of whole genome sequencing as is this the same type of catalyst dial-up internet access was, dial-up internet access took you from offline to online. Whole genome sequencing is going to take you from reactive medicine to preventative wellness. So it's just this massive change. So on Christine's point, it's not just about limited genetic data, it's about your entire whole genome. As the price point continues to plunge, it's really around 1,000. Illumina Marketing will tell you it's around 600. And then there's dark economy players that are selling whole genome at a loss, copying the genetic model where it's substantially less than $600. So you're not giving up just a little piece of your genetic profile, you're giving up your entire blueprint. So the stakes are much, much higher with genome sequencing than just with limited genetic testing. So we're at this particular moment in time where if we do the right thing as an industry, it'll have a dramatic positive effect. And so I applaud everything Christine's doing. And I fully respect that the genome is just the initial catalyst and the ongoing baseline. It's going to be omic, multi-omic data, IoT data. And now they're starting to talk about medical device IoT data. So whatever we decide to do as a policy with whole genome sequencing data is going to impact a lot of data silos.
Michael, can you also tell us, like, I know that you're working on this project, and what are my rights as a person? Like, if I were to go through with something like this, we've talked about it in detail, but no one else is really familiar with this. So can you explain a little more?
So it's very, very tricky. So your rights relative genetic and genomic data are not dissimilar to your rights with other data, advertising related to data that we see Facebook, Google, blah, 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 monetizing. So it's really uncharted ground. So it's, if you take a test, check a box, I'm literally quoting verbatim from some of these consent forms. You should not expect any financial benefit, no intellectual property or similar rights. You will not receive compensation. So that has really nothing to do with the genetic and genomic tests unless they have some kind of ambitions against monetizing your data. So short answer to your question, Christine, there isn't really any established procedures at this time. And that's something that we're very interested in hoping to influence.
Perfect. So how does the whole genome sequencing, like how does that affect the precision medicine aspect of, my own healthcare, if I were able to do this?
Okay, so again, I really sincerely believe we're at this moment in time, not dissimilar to the rise of the web, where there's just going to be this massive new economy. So we saw the web economy dwarf the traditional IT economy, and it's kind of ambitious as this sounds, I really think that the preventative wellness economy starting from scratch is going to eventually dwarf what we think of as the traditional healthcare economy. So there's two major silos, and Christine just touched on the first one. Precision medicine, from my perspective, really doesn't start until someone gets their genome sequenced. And in that moment, Christine goes from a demographic to an individual. So you're going to see post C19 economy, you're going to see massive new services called genomics as a service, where healthcare systems are getting their entire patient client base sequenced, and they can start down the road with precision medicine. And then there's what I've referred to a brand new economy called preventative wellness, and the catalyst for starting that economy is also the genome. And Christine, should I speak briefly about that, or is it premature?
Yeah, but I did want to make a comment on the precision medicine side of it. I did have a partial genome sequencing and my pharmacogenomics, and the testing from what I've had have actually impacted my care significantly, right? We know certain drugs and certain compounds that I can't take, my care has changed. And if we had some of this information, we may have avoided some of the costs that are, potentially going to keep coming with me, right? Joint replacements, another joint replacement, all of these things. So just to touch on that precision medicine aspect of it, and that there are benefits alone to some of that in your own healthcare. And then, sorry, now you can go back.
Yeah, so genomics is going to change medicine. It's going to go from, quite literally to demographic based, to precision based, to individual based. But it's also going to be the spark for this brand new economy. So when I say brand new economy, what does that mean? Is that when people have access to their genomic data, there'll be a whole new data set, genomic demographic data, that'll spawn a massive product personalization trend. So if you Google product personalization today, there's an incredible amount of interest in it. And we haven't even started to talk about the potential for personalizing anything to do with health, nutrition, lifestyle, on and on and on. And I believe, similar to the 90s, where every company had to rush out and get a web strategy, in the next decade, they're good. A lot of companies, directly and indirectly associated with wellness, are going to have to rush out and get a preventative wellness strategy based on this new category of data, genomic demographic data. And that's sort of the first obvious thing. The second obvious thing is that if you go to a self-insured employer in the United States today, and a self-insured employer is typically an employer with 500 or more employees, that's a population of about 80 million self-employed employees in the United States. And if you talk to the CEO, it's very likely their second biggest pain point after payroll is healthcare costs, going up 6% a year. There's not very much they can do about it. They're getting to the point where they have to transfer those additional costs out to employees. And it's only recently been concluded that's probably one of the key factors associated with payroll stagnation for lower paid employees in the last couple of decades, the rise of healthcare costs. So the genome, if Christine is an employee, so we talked about Christine, the patient, and how everything's going to change. For Christine as the employee, if we have her genome, and again, it is very early, but we have the first real data. It's the first time in history we have visibility into Christine's future, and we can start down the road to a preventative wellness roadmap. So the genome tells us what she's genetically predisposed for. We don't know much. What we will know in 10 years will be mind-boggling. On this call, all of us went, and when we were born, no relationship with data. Now we've got this mind-boggling relationship with data through our smartphones, which we carry with us. We're together on this call. We have no relationship with our personal biology. And I'm suggesting that this new preventative wellness economy is going to deliver upon a relationship with our personal biology, not dissimilar to the one we have with our mobile devices. And this is not just another data set. This is a whole new relationship where Christine will have pretty good stats on time of death, cause of death, and she'll be constantly managing her preventative wellness against those stats. The genome is just the start. Then we go to multi-omic, IoT, and 80% of the things in front of us, I don't think we can even see coming yet.
So Michael, tell me a little bit about how you see ownership and control going with the genomic data that we'll be collecting.
So my company is very, very simply one of the early direct-to-consumer whole genome sequencing service providers. And all that means is that if you want to enter this sort of precision or preventative game, we can get you sequenced through relationships with the labs. And so I look at it as again, the web analogy is we're like a dial-up internet access provider. We get you started. We rely on partners for analysis, reporting, et cetera. Our job is just to get your genome sequence and get it in the cloud. What we are trying to do, which is different, and I think you're going to see a lot of attention around, if that genome hits the cloud, whether Christine paid for it, whether her employer paid for it, or whether a healthcare system paid for it, Christine owns and controls that genomic data. So not only is the gatekeeper for any use cases of that data, in the future, if there's any opportunity to monetize that data for product personalization, or possibly even a greater market that we don't even understand yet, artificial intelligence, because this is another data set and AI lives on data, Christine will be the benefactor of that monetization. So our vision for ownership and control is that Christine owns the data, and any monetization in the future she directly benefits from.
So you talked about doing this on an open platform, and I know there is probably a few people on here that don't really understand what an open platform really is. Can you kind of describe that and how you see that working?
Sure. So today, if Christine gets her genome sequenced, we're going to sequence your genome, Christine. Here's a handful of tests that you get to pick which ones you'd like to do. And that's kind of it. So our vision is that Christine gets her genome sequenced, it sits on an open platform, and she has the ability to use that data for any test that she wants. So she may just be, the typical employee will do a handful of tests, but someone like Christine who's very enthusiastic and is, basically trying to treat herself, have the option to run that genomic data against any test she chose. So she would be the gatekeeper. So, and not to sort of jump too far ahead, is that then we go, open platform also means that Christine wants to start storing her omic data, her multi-omic data, her IoT data, her individual gathered electronic records. So Christina will start to build out what we think will be a digital me in the future. So you're starting to hear rumblings about digital me's, avatars, et cetera. I think that that's something that's going to occur, where there's going to just be this sort of digital version of Christine, where she has this incredible amounts of what used to be disparate silos of data brought together in one place that gives her tremendous visibility into her future preventative wellness roadmap.
And I think this is amazing too, as well, because I know some of you know my story, but my old hospital system that I was with actually lost a lot of my data. So I actually went from, they had 28 volumes at one point to just 5,000 pages. So I pretty much at this point am rebuilding my own medical history. And I think for me, the genomic data, the data, or I'm sorry, the pharmacogenomics, all of that helps me rebuild what I'm missing. So I think there's so many advantages to doing this. And do you want to tell us any more and how this would affect us in the rare disease community? Because this conference is all about.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I thought it was very interesting. So other than the opportunity for ownership and control and distribution of wealth, I think genomics is going to usher in the age of citizen science, which interestingly enough, I was hearing Crystal talk about on an earlier webinar today. So what does that look like from my perspective is that going back to the IT world, as a result of the smartphone, data resided at the edge. So the advantage of having data at the edge as opposed to silos, it means that companies like Airbnb could create apps, and these were quite literally apps before they were companies, because data resided at the edge, and they could explode into huge companies and transform industries. I see the same potential for medicine, and specifically starting with rare diseases. So if the genomic and the multi-omic and the self-gathered IoT data resides at the edge under the control of the user, it would be relatively straightforward for people in the rare disease community to start self-organizing rare disease cohorts. And I have had the good fortune of attending some of these rare disease conferences and sees the mother and the children. And I think it's going to be a highly, highly motivated group of individuals that are going to take it upon themselves to start organizing, rare disease related data, genomic, other data in it, and develop these cohorts and, really sort of start to take, to some degree, medicine and discovery in their own hands as self-organized cohorts, and I see rare disease as the first big use case. And if Christine doesn't mind me just making a couple more comments, if there's a couple of exceptional TED Talks by individuals who had issues, and they stood up and they said, I'm going to do something about this myself. And you're probably all familiar with Sharon Terry and her TED Talk, and how she just took on rare disease on her own and became sort of a legend in the industry. And then Martha Carlin with Gut Biome, again, confronted with an issue in her life, no training, no background, took on Biome and is now one of the sort of early experts in Biome in terms of consumer use cases.
You talk about the citizen science, and I know Crystal mentioned it before, but I think the biggest advocates are those of us who struggle alone, right? I was on a conference the other day and somebody had mentioned that to me, that the ones that are making a difference are these people that have had to go through this alone, and how do you figure it out? So I think the rare disease community, I mean, that's a lot of people who are alone or feel alone. So I think starting with this community and seeing what we can do just has the potential to go so much further, just with the quality of people you have in this space.
And I think if the self-organizing cohorts are going to jumpstart a lot of science activity that you may sort of be doing on your own initially, but will suddenly become very fundable based on your early groundwork. But I'm not an expert, but that's what I think will be coming.
Well, I see it too. I see that we are also at 10:32. And unless you have any other things, we can take comments. Or if anyone wants to hop on, I see Crystal and Andra in there. If you guys want to ask any questions or say anything, we're happy to talk to you too. I see Crystal coming on.
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. So one, I know Dr. Brooks is going to be coming on and talking later today about platform trials. And I really see that as an innovative route to improve access for rare disease patients. But we are lacking the genomic data at this point for our patient communities to come together and use treatments that could potentially treat conditions through the same pathways. So how quickly do you think that we will get to that point where that, although the FDA is receptive to platform trials, that the patient communities can really drive them?
I think, short answer to your question, I think it's going to be economics driven. So regardless of what you read in the press, 30x whole genome sequencing is really still north of $1,000, even though it's talked about at other price points. And if it's lower than that, it's a very good chance they're doing it offshore and they're copying your data and selling at a loss and blah, blah, blah. So all you have to do is drill down on the consent form, and there's all these monetary clauses. But the short answer to your question is that it's widely believed within the industry that we're not too far from the $100 genome, which would be completely consistent with progress we've made in the last about, I guess it's been almost 20 years since the first genome was sequenced for approximately $2.5 billion. Then it just plummeted 5 times Moore's law. And so $100 is on the horizon. And at that point, it'll be essentially ubiquitous, because the upside for the employer, the upside for medicine is so high. I think business models will kick in and it'll essentially be free, because there'll just be so many people interested in getting your genome sequenced to serve their business or serve. So short answer your question, I would say within the next couple of years, you're going to see.
Funny that you say that, Michael, because when I was talking to everyone at Stanford about it with their program, they had said the same thing. Within a few years, that this would be a very affordable test that would have benefits that would outweigh the cost. So, I don't know.
Yeah, Crystal, I kind of went way too on, but there's two major intersections: the price plunging and this huge pain point in self-insured employers, this huge upside for self-insured for healthcare. So we will see the hockey stick moment in the next couple of years. And this is a product that will be used ubiquitous as internet access.
Yeah. So Michael, go Go ahead, Crystal.
I was just going to say that I think that's great, and that we need to realize the value in repeat sequencing too. I know that Michael Snyder, Dr. Snyder, is the most sequenced person in the world, I believe. And through all his sequencing, he's really revealed so much. And I think it's important that we have these baseline sequences when possible. And he knew that he had a polygenic risk score for diabetes, but because he keeps sequencing himself, when he contracted RSV, he was able to know that that was what actually triggered having diabetes. So I wonder how often that we will actually do repeat sequencing, and if it will become commonplace to do it when we're ill. But not only that, but what about sequencing communities at large on a regular basis? We've had COVID, and we would know when it started to rear its head and in what communities. And I think also in regard to SynBio and bioterrorism, that we could very quickly pinpoint any issues there if we're doing regular sequencing.
So I think you're going to see, yes, I totally agree on resequencing, and I think you're going to see it unfold in two different ways. First, we sequence your genome. If the raw data is the FASTQ, then it's the BAM file, that shows all the different variants, et cetera, et cetera. And then the VCF is the one that makes you the individual, the one that's information about you, the individual. So in the immediate short term, we just do BAM refreshes against the latest and greatest research. So we're essentially just making sure that, what we think about you is up to date. But the longer term, I think that sequencing is going to be so cheap that just resequencing is going to be like nothing. We went from mainframes filling a whole room to, handheld devices that, could extraordinary power. And we're seeing that, very early on. We've gone from Illumina machines to Oxford Nanopore. So I think resequencing is going to be relatively trivial in a relatively brief period of time.
Michael, I just had one other question too, is that as people are moving forward into this genome sequencing world, do you have any tips for people who may possibly want to do this on their own? Because I know, not every company is up to a certain level. So how do you look for companies if you're, looking at doing things like this? Or how do you know what to trust when you're out there?
So just two things that I would look for is you want CAP CLIA labs in the United States. So who is ever offering you the sequencing, you want to make sure that they're using CAP CLIA labs located within the United States. And then second, you want to read who's ever selling you the product, because the labs are in the United States are very well intentioned, highly credible, very ethical. But it's when, the person reselling you the product, you have to be extremely careful about reading the fine print, the privacy statement and the consent form. And there's, in my perspective, there should be no language related to monetization, We have one statement, it's you own and control your data, hard stop. There's no language, there's no need for any language about benefiting from the monetary blah, 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 unless you're actually up to, dark economy related activity.
Well, I'm glad that you're here to give me the tips, because I wouldn't be able to maneuver it alone. And I think we're almost out of time. I thought we were supposed to end in 1 minute. So unless anyone has anything else, but Michael and I are both on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with Michael or myself, feel free to look us up and connect there. And I think we're all done.